So, Steve, what would you consider the most important skill for effective communication in your workplace?
I think the most effective skill is listening. So many people, when they get into a conversation, are trying to either fix somebody or tout what they know. And the best way to grow in a conversation and communication skills is to understand your audience. That's one of the things they talk about in public speaking. Understand who you're talking to. So especially in counseling situations, a lot of times in the first couple times that I meet with people, I'm just really listening. I've been pastor here for just over 8 months now, and I haven't done a lot of changes in the church because I knew that I was going to be committed in the first year to just observing. I'm listening to what's going on. I'm listening and seeing how this church is run. I'm listening to see what needs to happen, and then eventually out of that I'm starting to see and pray through, like, how do we implement things so that it meets the needs of the church and not come in and push an agenda of mine in that way. Because I've seen too many churches and other organizations fail because we try to push agendas without listening to the people and what they need in that way. So what I do in a pastoral works maybe a lot different than like public, a public job or workforce work. I'm listening to what's going on in the church and then trying to align it with what God's telling me through the scriptures, and then trying to say, okay, now let's marry those two things together. But until I listen first, I can't know exactly what's going on. So listening's key in communication.
Do you feel the same with your wife and your children?
Absolutely. I mean, with kids, it's so easy. They get in trouble and you just want to spout off and punish them, right? You don't get to you don't understand like why they're acting the way that they're doing, why they're having this hard time in school, or why they're having this hard time at home. You need to listen to what's going on in their lives. And the same thing with your wife. I mean, scripturally, in Christian marriage, the wife and the husband are one flesh. So when my wife is feeling strong, I'm strong. When she's not, I'm weak too. And just like when you have some ailment in your body, you want to take care of it. But you also know that a lot of times where the pain is doesn't necessarily mean that that's where the issue is. It could be a deferred pain. So there's a lot of investigating needs to happen. You need to listen to things and listen to your wife and your kids. You need to listen to your body when you're trying to take care of your body. I knew that as an athlete. You have to listen to your body in order to stay healthy.
So you would feel that also listening in turn is the same for effective communication to help with resolving conflict, right?
Absolutely. And it's listening. Again, listening in a way to understand why the conflict is happening. Because we are people, we always have a different point of view that's not objective in a lot of ways. Very subjective. We have subjective feelings that can sometimes mire stuff or muddy the water, and sometimes it's good over time to just let the waters kind of clarify themselves by letting the sediment drop. One of the hardest things to do is try to resolve a conflict immediately as the conflict is happening, because there's a lot of emotion going on and there's a lot of assuming going on during the conflict, that sometimes it's best to try to pull people aside one by one and find out what's your perspective, and then have some time in order to bring those perspectives together before you bring the conflicting people together, so that they can see, a lot of times it's misunderstanding. Somebody misunderstood a look or something somebody said, or an intention behind why somebody said something. And it's the importance of taking time to negotiate the emotion and negotiate what people are saying to each other, and then try to stitch that together.
That was actually my next question was, how do you handle conversation when it regards deep emotion with values or beliefs or even personal counseling, and you covered that some. So what would you consider to be some of the toughest barriers you encounter, and what's more important to you, verbal or nonverbal communication that you see when speaking with someone?
I think one of the biggest things biggest barriers is for people. I've heard it said many times, like, ministry would be fun if it wasn't for people. Well, and the reason is because we all have our individuality, and we all have our way of interpreting things. As a pastor, you're a lot of times called to be a mediator. And a mediator is somebody that brings two parties together and helps them negotiate what's going on, with the idea that you want to resolve the problem. Now, like in marriage, I do premarital counseling. There's a great illustration of this too. The Battle of Bull Run in Gettysburg, or not Gettysburg, the Battle of Bull Run in the Civil War. People went to that battle thinking it was just going to be a one-day skirmish, right? And instead it blew into a 4-year war. Now, what caused the 4-year war? Was it because there was less than ideal farmland that was causing people to rumble over it? Or was it the hearts of human beings and the fact that they were seeing things differently and they had no way to really resolve it other than go kill each other? And it's the same way with marriage. In marriage, so often you hear people say, we're having marriage problems. Well, is it the marriage that has problems, or is it people that have problems in the marriage? And the reason why people have problems in marriage is because you have two different individualities going at each other, two different personalities that interpret and understand the signs and the times and all kinds of things differently. And you've got to bring them to an idea and an understanding that maybe what they see is a little bit skewed from what the other person's seeing. I mean, a lot of times conflict happens because we misinterpret the intention behind why something's brought up. In a marriage situation, especially a biblical marriage situation, we're called to bring each other to Christ's likeness. Now, that calls for confrontation. So when my wife comes up to me and says, Steve, I think that what you're doing has been hurtful to me, my natural inclination is to become angry and defensive in that way, right? Because how dare you tell me that I'm not a good father, I'm not a good husband, or that maybe what I did was sinful. And more times than not, it is sinful what I do, because we're sinful human beings. But I can misinterpret her confrontation as an attack, and so naturally in our sinful state we want to attack back. So we throw grenades at each other until somebody's wounded or mortally hurt or backs away. Whereas in a healthy relationship, my wife should feel the grace and the ability to confront me. And with the understanding of knowing that she's doing it for my best interest, knowing that if we do believe that two become one flesh in a marriage situation, that she's confronting me because something I'm doing is hurting her. And in hurting her, it's hurting me. And there's got to be a lot of grace, and there's got to be an understanding in that way. And that's one of the hardest things to do when you're communicating each other. How do I communicate in such a way that people understand what I'm getting at without trying to be overbearing with it or trying to drive an agenda behind it? And maybe even an agenda that doesn't fit somebody right now. There's an interesting text in the Bible that Jesus talks about throwing pearls before swine. Don't throw pearls before swine. And people take that as, well, don't give the gospel to non-believers. Well, then if nobody gives the gospel to non-believers, how do non-believers become believers? The thing is what Jesus is teaching there is sometimes our teaching can be given in such a way that people don't understand it and it doesn't feed them. It gives them the wrong things that they're taking in. And so a pig that's hungry turns around and bites something that it can eat, right? That's usually you in that way. So there's a tactic, there's a tact in such a way. One of my favorite sayings, and it's probably not the best thing to say as a pastor in that way, is a Winston Churchill saying. I love Winston Churchill, he's my favorite. He talks about tact. He said tact is the ability to tell somebody to go to hell in such a way that they're going to enjoy the trip or look forward to the trip. And I've always loved that, but there's that idea of understanding a situation, stepping back from it before you engage in it, taking an evaluation of it so that you can help the individual in communicating better.
Okay. Well, I really appreciate you taking the time to do this interview with me, and I think that completes this one.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Awesome.